Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board College Football Podcast. It is championship week, guys and girls. Teams get crowned, the best teams in their conference. We'll find out on Sunday who's headed to the college football playoff as well. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleagues and co-hosts, Brad Powers and Payne Insider. And gentlemen, hopefully you survived Thanksgiving in whatever capacities you chose to celebrate.
It was rough on the betting front. I'm not going to lie. Thursday and Friday about ended me. It was as bad as it gets, but that Saturday was better. I'll put it that way.
Sounds quite similar. I thought we had a shot at a very big weekend, potentially a 10-1 type vibe, but the variance and the bad beats continue. And it was a rough week. I actually texted Brad. I said, man, the way the non-Powers 5 best bet is going, we're just going to roll you out for 3 minutes, call the podcast, and I don't have to show up anymore.
The market agrees. That thing's getting pounded in the market. I don't know if it's this podcast, but my goodness.
It's not. And Todd didn't come to me because there was not enough time, but there was 2 buy orders, and I texted you the night before. There was a buy order coming in on Ball State. So anytime it seems that there's a match, those become quite gold.
Yeah, Brad, peeling back the curtain a little bit before we get into some of the games themselves, Payne got a little superstitious, and that's kind of how the season is gone. He goes, I didn't give Brad the endorsement on the podcast like I've done the last couple weeks when I agree. I'm not sure if that's going to be the kiss of death or if that's going to be a good thing. And so he hemmed and hawed. He watched that number go from 6.5 down to 4, 3.5, and not sure he had any skin in the game there as Ball State finds a way to get to the window.
I didn't. I did own a percentage of the accounts that it came in, which was nice. But other than that, no, I didn't have like a full position on there because... Yeah, I was a little superstitious and then didn't get the number and too disciplined. Too disciplined, sir.
Well, look, I mean, I can't harp on anybody who talks about discipline. I was the monkey that chased UAB plus 2.5 to see that game fall 3 when 3 was widely available all week. So let it be a valuable learning experience, much like Sunday, Payne. Plus 3, plus 105 in the NFL, not nearly as good as plus 3.5, minus 15, and we will leave it at that Eagles-Bills game. Pac-12 championship, gentlemen. Oregon, Washington, right here in the backyard for Brad and myself. It is Oregon, an overwhelming favorite right now in that 9.5, 10 range, total hovering between 66, 66.5, and even a rogue 67 out there. And when we look at these two teams, there'll be plenty of star power on display. Only 37 FBS players have 900 receiving yards this season, including 4 sets of teammates. You'll see 2 of them this week with Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk on one side, Tez Johnson and Troy Franklin on the other side. First Pac-12 matchup between AP top 5 teams since 1976, when number 3 UCLA number 2 UCLA lost to number 3 USC. Washington seeking their first 3-game winning streak versus Oregon since the late 80s. Second meeting between these teams, both ranked inside the AP top 10. They hadn't met as AP top 10 teams in the previous 114 meetings. Oregon, 6th appearance in the Pac-12 championship game, 2 more than any team. Played for the national championship in 2 of the last 3 seasons that featured a 10-1 start up in Eugene. Oregon, they've gone out there and they've crushed their competition. They've won 8 games by 24-plus points this season, second most in the FBS, behind only Michigan. And when you look at what Dan Lanning's been able to accomplish, 20-0 with him at the helm when this program allows 30 points or fewer, just 1-4 when teams go over the threshold, including what Washington did earlier this year in Seattle. Meanwhile, for the Huskies, they haven't trailed by more than 7 points at any point in a game this season. They've trailed in 5 games total for less than 100 minutes. Kalen DeBoer, meanwhile, 22-0 as head coach at Washington when his teams allow fewer than 40 points, 1-2 when they allow opponents to cross that particular threshold. Washington comes into this game 12-0 for the first time since 1991. Gentlemen, when we look at these games, Brad, Washington took sharp money in the first meeting below the key. We saw it drift up into that 3 minus 20 range first time around. They closed, 3.25 thereabouts. Now you see the market with Oregon a massive favorite here. We know current form plays a big role, but is this a bridge too far to cross given some of Washington's struggles against inferior opponents and Oregon going out there over the last month and boat racing everyone that steps in front of them?
Yeah, it seems like an extreme adjustment, but according to my ratings, it's not. In fact, it's not as much as I've adjusted these two teams since the first meeting. And I'll start with that first meeting. I was on the Washington side, pre-flop there, but I thought Oregon ended up. I mean, if we're regrading the game, I thought Oregon should have won and covered, obviously, in that one. And I actually upgraded Oregon for the performance in that one. And then since then, obviously, you get big thumbs up arrow for Oregon. I've upgraded them 5 points since that Washington performance, and I've downgraded Washington 4 points, and I think I can attribute the Washington downgrade to specifically the play of Michael Penix. Keep in mind, after the Oregon game, he's a minus money favorite in the Heisman futures markets. I mean, you want to talk about overreacting to one single performance. But man, hindsight's 2020, but I should have gotten involved when I saw that was the case there. But we kind of speculated Arizona State week. Number opened way short. I speculated, whoa, maybe somebody knows something that Penix isn't going to play or really isn't healthy. Well, I'm here to tell you, he hasn't played like he's been 100% the last 6 games. First 6 games, deserve it, Heisman favorite. We're talking about a guy completed over 70% of his passes, 20 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, nearly 400 passing yards per game. Since the Oregon game, less than 60% completion rate. 12 touchdown passes in 6 games. That's it with that high-powered passing attack. 5 picks, 266 passing yards per game. So well under more than 100 yards per game less on average. Doesn't look healthy. Wide receivers have been banged up a little bit. Obviously, Adunze's still there, but the other guys haven't flashed, so to speak, here in recent weeks. So I think it's been justified as far as the downgrade for Washington, the upgrade for Oregon, to the point where I'm a little involved on Oregon this week. It wasn't such a shocking number to me.
You mentioned being banged up at the receiver position. Jalen McMillan, who hadn't had a catch since the Michigan State game way back in September, 5 catches, 26 yards against Washington State last weekend. But Jalen Polk, opposite him, has been held to 0 catches in back-to-back games. I know one was played in a rainstorm against Oregon State, but rather surprising last week in the best conditions that you can expect in an Apple Cup in a game that was tightly contested from start to finish. Payne, Brad mentioned Michael Penix and some of his struggles. When you look at a game like this, Oregon defensively has trended up. I think it's one of the more underappreciated units, maybe not just in the West Coast, but the entire country, given that Bo Nix garners all the headlines as he is the front runner for the Heisman Trophy right now. You look at the numbers he's put forth. He's getting his tandem of receivers involved. Bucky Irving hasn't looked like his same explosive self offensively, but still getting the lion's share of the carries there. As you begin to handicap this game, knowing we have one prior data point between these two teams, what do you see being the key matchup, knowing that if Washington gets on track, Oregon's secondary is a little bit banged up, but the Huskies' defense has left a lot to be desired. It's a question of bend but don't break mentality, and I think if you're Kalen DeBoer and company, you have to see holding Oregon to field goals this week as wins.
This is one of the more interesting games. I think all of the games this week have more moving parts than you would traditionally have late in the season. Just off the cuff, it feels that way. I think Brad hit on a lot of the key points there. You're looking at this number, right, and you're thinking like, hey, looks potentially a little nutty. I don't see it that way. I mean, we're seeing Washington continue to win, and that's all that matters for fans and making the college football playoff. It's just been a struggle. Brad referenced the Arizona State game, but they had every opportunity to win that game. Arizona State is like a 4-touchdown underdog. It didn't end there. Like Stanford gave Washington trouble as a 4-touchdown dog. Undermanned Utah was a dogfight. Oregon State dictated the entire second half against Washington, and then last week, I mean, the Huskies don't even come close to reaching expectation in the Apple Cup. And I think it has a lot to do with Michael Penix. He's certainly battling some things. Is it the injury? Is it the flu, right? There's some things going on there. what we know for sure is like when you look at Washington's trending metrics when they pass the football, like it's slipping, right? And basically this is an offense that's gone from being top 3 in every single passing category that's meaningful. The 6-game trend line is like, it's below the top 25. So, I mean, that's massive when you think about being a pass-first outfit, an offense-first team, and offense correlates to winning more than defense. That drop might seem small on the surface, but it's really meaningful. Now, you hit it perfectly in that Oregon secondary, I think, is better on paper than reality, despite some of those improvements. And it's not shocking Dan Lanning, a defensive mind, improved his defense in year 2, right? That's the least surprising thing ever. But the Ducks haven't really been tested through the air. You also look at Jaleel Florence, was seen on the sideline in crutches this past week. Roderick Pleasant hasn't played the last 2 games with an injury. So that's how Washington is going to win this game, right? Is Penix returning to form, especially with Dylan Johnson not looking 100% on the ground there. But I think the path for the Ducks to have offensive success, getting back to like Bo Nix, is it at least has 2 roads. Right, and that's likely the difference here. Is in the first meeting we talked about Oregon's phone booth offense. If you go back in time, was Washington going to allocate more bodies into the box? They did, and it helped defend Oregon's short pass game. Bo Nix still threw 71% of his passes either behind the line of scrimmage or short.
It's bubble screen Bo, baby. Let it go.
Yeah. And if you look at the numbers, Washington actually did a relatively decent job. They held Bo Nix to a passer rating 26 points below his season average on those types of throws behind the line of scrimmage and in that short area. I think Oregon should throw a few more passes deep this go-around. If you look, Nix was 3 for 3 on 20-plus yard throws in that first meeting. If he can hit a few of those early, I think it actually helps open up the ground game. And really, even with like Washington defending short passes relatively well in that first meeting, we're all sitting here saying, as we assess this game for the second time, Oregon probably should have won that game. They still had a 51% success rate on offense, gained nearly 70% of the available yards. The Ducks just lost the 4th down variance battle. Right? I mean, Oregon was 0 for 3 on 4th down, including getting stopped twice inside the Huskies' 5-yard line. The final 4th down miss was to salt the game away late. And they showed grit because they were down double digits at one point. I think Washington has to put more bodies in the box again. We've talked ad nauseum about Washington's physicality and their defensive front 7, still outside the top 100 in defensive line yards, tackles for loss, rushing success rate, and EPA per rush allowed. Oregon forced 19 missed tackles the first matchup. Washington is graded outside the top 100 in tackling. Oregon is just I think they're just more physical, right, in the trench on that side of the ball. And I think when I start to zoom out and do some like deep dive into this, think about that matchup the first time. That was 6 games into the season. You're at home. You're off a bye week with 2 weeks to rest. And we're talking about the physicality of Washington's defense. What is it going to look like on a short week with travel in game 13 when it comes to physicality?
Off a bunch of close games, high leverage games in a row.
Yep. The Ducks O-line, top 10 in offensive line yards. Bucky Irving and Jordan James have slowed down a little bit, but that's still a fantastic 1-2 punch that's led Oregon to being top 5 in both rushing success rate and EPA per rush. I think Oregon has a real advantage there. But, it's like you look at this. Oregon's clearly the side. Oregon feels like they're in better form. But we've kind of gradually watched this line creep up. So I'm going to throw this back to you guys here. Like in the last 4 to 6 weeks, you look at some of these look-ahead lines. It's Oregon 4.5, then it goes to 6, 6.5. Last week it's 7.5. We reopen 8 on Sunday. As we record now, Oregon's out to -10. Mechanically speaking, if limits aren't an issue for you as a bettor, meaning you're betting a nickel a few times, we're now approaching Oregon -400 on the money line. Isn't it just better to bet Bo Nix to win Heisman at -150 if you like the Ducks Friday night?
Yep. I've had that thought process. I mean, if you think Oregon is the right side here, then you must concur that Bo Nix is going to have a big game. And if he has a big game, then he's most likely going to win the Heisman.
Yeah, I mean, the only way you probably get screwed here is if somehow the game ends like 13-10, right? And Bo Nix doesn't have a touchdown and Oregon's kicking like a game winner at the bell, or if somehow Washington wins. But that was just kind of my thought process. Like, if you're willing to wait a couple weeks to get paid, it just seems like having some leverage to Bo Nix -150 to win Heisman is better than, laying 10 or minus 400 on the money line.
Brad, you mentioned Oregon and how you've upgraded their power ratings. Where do they rank for you in terms of the national landscape amongst the Georgias and the Michigans right now, given their surge in overall performance?
I have them 2 behind Georgia. A little bit ahead of Michigan. Just mainly Michigan's a little bit banged up off the Buckeye game, so not much separation between those two. But number 2, and just look at them statistically, basic counting stats. Number 1 in yards per play margin, number 1 in yards per game margin, number 1 in points per game margin. And then you look at strength of schedule, very similar strength of schedule to Michigan and Georgia, and yet Oregon's the team that's number 1 in all 3 of those basic categories. So, I don't have a problem with it, having Oregon up there. I know people have said, when the committee has them up there and they're looking at some of the other metrics, and then they mention the eye test. I will say Oregon does pass the eye test, specifically offensively.
Little to say that if we do get a Georgia-Oregon game somewhere down the line in the college football playoff, I don't think the Bulldogs win that matchup 49-3 like they did the first time around. Dan Lanning went up against Kirby Smart there in Old Athens. So fun game Friday night here in the desert, leading into a very busy Saturday of championship games. And we have some big numbers here, but maybe a little bit of opportunity worth exploiting. And things will kick off Saturday, 11 o'clock Central from Jerry's World in Arlington at AT&T Stadium, with Texas more than a 2-touchdown favorite taking on Oklahoma State. And when we look at this rivalry, it's the first time these programs haven't played during the regular season in quite some time, knowing that the Big 12 used to be a full round robin. Oklahoma State's actually beaten Texas in one-possession games in both 2021 and 2022. High-scoring affairs, 41-34 last year in Stillwater, 32-24 back in Austin. When we look at Texas, they had their largest win since 2021 last weekend against Texas Tech, beating them 57-7. It was actually their largest win versus a Big 12 opponent going all the way back to 2007. It's the first Big 12 championship game berth for this proud program since 2018, and they're seeking their first win since 2009. Meanwhile, for Oklahoma State on the other side, they're seeking their 3rd straight win versus an AP Top 10 team for the first time since 1976, and their 2nd ever Big 12 title. 2nd appearance in the conference championship game coming in the last 3 seasons. And for those college football fans that remember, they came up 1 yard short, not just of winning the Big 12, but potentially getting themselves into the college football playoff against Baylor. When you look at the Cowboys, they've won 7 of 8 since a 2-2 start, including 2 in a row since that 45-3 dismantling at the hands of UCF. 9 wins for the 2nd time in 3 seasons for Coach Gundy and company. And when you look at Oklahoma State during their 5-game win streak, they've scored on the first possession of each game with 4 touchdowns and a field goal when things are really clicking. But this is a team that has shown an ability to bounce back and resilience, erasing 14-point deficits in back-to-back games for the first time in school history, and wins against Houston the week before and BYU in double overtime last week. Brad, Texas offensively, we've seen them return to basics, and they put forth a gaudy rushing performance even without Jonathan Brooks. 302 yards on the ground versus Texas Tech, the 2nd most they've had in a game this season, and that was on the heels of a contest against Iowa State where they had to lean a little bit more on the pass game. Quinn Ewers starting to look the part, returning from injury, getting Xavier Worthy involved against an Oklahoma State defense that, quite frankly, leaves a lot to be desired and gave up 4 plays of 24-plus yards against BYU. When you look at this side of the ball, what does Oklahoma State need to do to find success against the Texas offense that can be extremely explosive when they start playing with confidence?
Pray. No, I mean, legitimately, obviously give pressure, basic stuff, give pressure, force turnovers, lean on Texas. That's not obviously fully healthy, losing a key cog like Brooks. Just when you thought, Texas, you were waiting for them to get that key running back to get the running game going. We talked about it in the Kansas game and previewing the Oklahoma game. That finally, just when it was starting to get going there, and you can really rely on Brooks on a game in and game out basis, you lose him for the season, and now you got more of a running back by committee approach there. So, with the pathway for Oklahoma State's success, I don't know. It's kind of, I can envision it just because I kind of, watching Texas offense, even though they put a 57 number up last week, it's kind of meh. It's a good offense. I don't think it's top 10. I'm going to give credit to Payne at the start of the season. He's never been a believer in Quinn Ewers. And, outside of the first quarter against Alabama last year and the Alabama game this year, hitting some deep balls, I haven't seen it on a game in and game out on a weekly when I'm watching the tape. Now, obviously, you're not 100% here. I was rewatching the Iowa State game and prep for this, and Brock Heward was talking about this is the type of injury that it's going to have to get better over time. He's good enough to play now, but it should get better in the coming weeks. But nothing that they've done offensively has really wowed me. They still got, an offensive line where their better players are underclassmen, and maybe they're wearing down a little bit because they've had protection issues the last couple of games, allowing 7 sacks. Ewers is fine. I don't know if he's a guy that's going to win you a playoff game right now in current form, so we'll see how healthy he can possibly get in the break there. But we are talking about an Oklahoma State defense that basic counting stats, number 116 in yards per play, number 115 in yards per game. They do an okay job of limiting scoring. I mean, they're only number 77 in the country in that regard. Some of the success rates and more advanced metrics are better. Number 22 in defensive success rate, number 52 in defensive EPA. But against the two of their better offenses they faced, Kansas and Oklahoma really lit them up through the air. And let's be honest, Texas's receiving core, when they want to be on, is as good as it gets, at least in the Big 12. The problem I have here is I don't know what Oklahoma State team's showing up. I mean, they've been very inconsistent all year. I mean, obviously I was very negative about Oklahoma State preseason. And I had confirmation bias early in September when they were losing by 26 at home to South Alabama. I thought I had a for sure fire, easy season win total under. And then they completely flipped the script post-bye. And October played like a borderline top 10 caliber team, highlighted by the early November win over their arch rival Oklahoma. Then they followed up with a 42-point loss against UCF. Okay, they're flat. Well, they're flat again in the first half against Houston. They rally. Well, they're flat again in a game that they need to win to get to the Big 12 championship, and they're down 18. I mean, I don't know what I'm getting here from this team all season. So it makes it a little bit of a tough handicap, but I just go back to the fact that it's simple thought process here. Texas might need margin here, and I'm factoring that into the handicap. This is the noon game on Saturday. They have no idea what's happening after them. So I think Texas, if given the opportunity to put a score on, I would have to assume that they do. So I agree with the money favorite and over here.
Payne, before I come to you for the other side of the ball, Brad, I want to ping pong right back to you. When you look at Coach Gundy and some of the interesting ATS numbers for Oklahoma State, and if there's actual substance to them or it's just more noise and clutter than anything else, when we look at Oklahoma State, the last 16 times they've been an underdog, 11-5 ATS, and they've won outright in those games 9 times, including earlier this year in Bedlam against Oklahoma. Granted, it was played in Stillwater, and that Friday night against Kansas State that I think was the season-defining moment for them where they were able to turn things around as a double-digit dog. They're 10-1 ATS in the last 13 games versus AP-ranked opponents, and when you look at how they've performed this year, they've played their best football against better competition. Is that a Gundy thing? Is it a cultural thing? Is it just more noise? How do you begin to account for some of that, given the inconsistency that we've seen from the Pokes seemingly on a week-in, week-out basis?
Really good question. And it did enter my thought process because numbers were strong on Texas. I think they have the motivation here. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of Oklahoma State to begin with all season. And yet the one thing that prevented me from really, I bet Texas, but really unloading on them and saying, hey, this is one of my favorite plays of the week type of situation, is that thought process that, Gundy, a little bit of chip on his shoulder, has historically done well in the underdog role. As a human being, he's a little peculiar. In my opinion, not always buttoned up, but when he is buttoned up, the guy can coach. You look at the last 15 years in college football. I think total wins. It's Saban, it's Dabo Swinney, and it's Mike Gundy. If you're just looking at overall wins in college football the last 15 years, so you don't do that by being a complete fool. And when he's locked in and has his team locked in, then yeah, it's not an ideal situation laying more than 2 touchdowns here against them.
Well, it makes sense, and it's one of those things that I kind of wanted to bring up and provides the perfect segue, Payne, to you as we look at the Oklahoma State offense, knowing that Gundy's trademark has been about high-flying offenses. We've seen over the last couple of years they've leaned a little bit more on defense. Alan Bowman this season, more interceptions than touchdown passes, and including 6 picks over his last 3 games with just 2 touchdown passes during that span. The yardage has been there, the touchdowns have not. So what does Oklahoma State do? They lean on a talented running back in Ollie Gordon, but in steps a Texas Longhorns defense that's one of the best in the country, let alone the conference, in terms of being able to make Oklahoma State one-dimensional. Do you see a path for the Cowboys to be able to move the football? Is it as straightforward as, hey, look, we know Gordon is our best player, but maybe we have to abandon the run to test a pedestrian defensive backfield for Texas that has given up the big play or two? No greater illustration than in the Kansas State game where the Wildcats were able to get right back into it.
Listening to you guys talk about this game is like reason 1,000,001 why sports betting is far more difficult than it should be for guys like us. And my mind starts to go in a bunch of different places, but it's difficult because you have like an Alabama under 10.5 wins and an Auburn over 6.5 wins, and you can't get a stop on 4th and goal from the 31-yard line last week, right? Or you blow a game to New Mexico State as a 4-touchdown home favorite. I bring that up, right, like to not relive Thanksgiving week, but Oklahoma State falls in that same bucket. I think it's a win total all 3 of us bet under 7, and that's lost. And it's an absolute mystery as to how. It's head-scratching that Oklahoma State is even playing in this game, and I kind of hear that in Brad's thought process. 133 college football teams out there. There hasn't been a singular one luckier than Mike Gundy's Oklahoma State Cowboys. Won 9 games.
I need some of that luck.
Yeah, we all could, yeah. But if you look based upon every single snap this season, when you account for both offense and defense, the expectation for Oklahoma State was 4.8 wins. And that's why the Big 12 championship game opened 11, and it's now 14.5. The good thing is kind of what I'm hearing from you guys, like Oklahoma State's playing with house money here. All the pressure is on Texas not to just win, but win by margin. And we've seen Sark and Ewers under pressure at times deliver a stinker or two. Now they've started to kind of right that ship a little bit. They've shown some moxie this year, winning games that they might have thrown away in past seasons. I look at Oklahoma State's offense and how it operates. I think what's interesting here is top 10 in plays per game, top 25 in plays per minute. You typically don't want more plays in a game you're outmatched and have less talent. So that'll be the interesting factor here to see that what Mike Gundy elects to do. The other interesting part here is I think Texas is going to force Oklahoma State to play left-handed. We all know how great Ollie Gordon is, real shot at a 2,000-yard season. But Oklahoma State's ground game is basically built on explosive runs and not really down-to-down success. If you look, the Pokes are outside the top 90 in offensive line yards created, outside the top 70 in rushing success rate. But Oklahoma State's top 25 in explosive runs. It's either a grand slam or a double play, it seems. So typically when you step up in class, down to down is more predictive of future success. There's variance and a little luck with explosives. You can't run on Texas. Everyone has tried and failed. I mean, Texas top 5 in defensive line yards allowed, top 5 in rushing success rate allowed, top 5 in explosive run defense. Basically, the Longhorns have become a pass funnel defensively. And so this game is going to be in the hands of Alan Bowman more than it is Ollie Gordon, is probably nauseating as that sounds for Oklahoma State fans. You hit it perfectly, Todd, in that the Longhorns defense is certainly susceptible in the back. Once Kansas State finally gave up running into brick walls, they worked their way back into the game and almost upset Texas by passing Milroe before he was supremely confident and claiming, he should be the Heisman, hit a bunch of explosives on Texas. You can find success throwing on the Longhorns. They're top 50 kind of in that fringe area and down-to-down passing success allowed, outside the top 70 in explosive pass defense. Also have to monitor the injury to their lead corner, Ryan Watts. He's been battling through injury all season, left the Texas Tech game. I think for us, if you're a loyal listener, we all have Texas to win the Big 12 plus 125 in our back pocket. I appreciate you gentlemen getting me over the hump there. I am down on Quinn Ewers relative to perception. I don't think he's a horrific quarterback. All of the hype relative to that, I wasn't buying that. That's a great position to be in with the money line now almost minus 700. I'm not hedging. I just thought rather than talking about
the way
obvious,
this season has
right?
gone on a scale of 1 to 10 confidence wise, Payne, are you at a 4 or are you at a 4.6?
Yeah, I thought, rather than talking about the obvious, right? We kind of discussed the path, albeit really thin. If we're watching in shock come 3 p.m. Saturday, it's because Sark and Ewers pissed down their leg and Alan Bowman was able to attack the Longhorns secondary. But I'm hoping we're all good winning a bet plus 125 that's now minus 700. But to your point, we have not even come closely remote to even running true this season.
No, I do not plan to cash that ticket until there are 3 zeros on that scoreboard and Texas mathematically has removed any chance.
I just wanted, we're not hedging.
No.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. Yeah.
If you like the other side in the game, it's a different story handicapping wise, but you shouldn't be going into this contest hedging a position plus $1.25 on the odds to win the conference that we gave out as a best bet earlier this season. From the Big 12, though, guys, to the Mountain West. Back-to-back games at Allegiant Stadium Friday night into Saturday. This one sees Boise State and UNLV doing battle. And all morning on Wednesday, this has been an absolute battle, and that's not taking it lightly. So we'll call Boise State a 2.5-point favorite in this game, 59 on the total. Computers in the Mountain West responsible for creating this matchup, much to the chagrin of San Jose State fans. When you look at conference metrics, this would have been only one of 3 leagues where UNLV Boise State would have been the matchup. When you talk about home field advantage, UNLV fans unfortunately didn't show out for that big game last week against San Jose State. No reason to believe that they'll be able to create a decided home field advantage this weekend, knowing that Boise State fans love to travel from the Treasure Valley down to Las Vegas every time the opportunity presents itself. When we look at Boise, this is their 7th Mountain West Championship appearance, extending their own record. The 4th win would break their tie with Fresno State for the most wins in the Mountain West Championship game. Interestingly enough, this was a team whose season was hanging on the brink, perilously close to going off the ravine after a loss to Fresno State. You lose your top receiver, you fire your head coach, but that's when Boise took advantage of a dead cat bounce, going 3-0, covering all 3 games in the process. 2-0 under interim head coach Spencer Danielson. Meanwhile, UNLV on the other side, the first ever conference championship game appearance for them, becoming the 9th team in the conference to make an appearance. 9 wins for the first time as a program since 1984. They had won 3 straight and 8 out of 9 before losing the regular season finale to San Jose State. Got themselves down 17-0 before outscoring the Spartans 31-14 over the game's final 47 minutes. Brad, when we look at UNLV, they came into this season right around 20-1 to win the Mountain West. I'm sure there were better prices out there. Boise State listed amongst the favorites, but for a while it didn't appear the Broncos had even a slightest path to try and get to this point. But here they are with a new lease on life, trying to get over the hump. Has the market reflected Boise's current form over the last 2-game sample size of Spencer Danielson, or what do you make of the way that they're pricing UNLV, knowing that we've seen money coming against the Rebels more often than not over the last couple weeks?
Yeah, really tough game to power rate because of, obviously fundamental changes. UNLV fundamental change happening over a course of an entire year with the upwards of the program under Odom in just year 1. And then for much of the season, the best ATS team in the country, at least prior to last week at 10-1, in a town that everybody likes to bet on the home team. And when you're covering each and every week, You would think that they were getting premium a little bit, but I think some of the point spreads have been so shocking, and there's probably hesitation with UNLV's history to, am I really betting UNLV +3 on the road against Air Force? I don't know. I think there's been a little bit of hesitation there in that regard. Boise State, the fundamental change in the last 2 weeks, it's tough to get a handle on it and whether or not it's real. We've seen 1 or 2 game bumps with the interims. I tend to think it is real here. Look no further than a player quitting the team, and then immediately after Avalos is fired, he wants back on the team. That kind of is a clue that something was not well with Avalos, and we've seen it reflected in the 2 games since then. Obviously wins and covers for him. Last week wasn't dominant, to say the least, but still Air Force with their backs against the wall, no lose situation. You got a good effort from Air Force and Boise. Still, even with a couple of turnovers from the quarterback, we're able to get it done. What do I think of Boise? I think I ponder myself when you start going back through their schedule and what happened to this team. What would this line be? Let's just change a couple plays. I'll start with the obvious one. A Hail Mary touchdown pass on the final play of the game with Colorado State. Say Boise wins that game and doesn't blow a 20-point lead with 5 minutes left. We know it. I hate to bring it up. 100-yard kick return touchdown on the final play of the first half that gives Fresno momentum just when Boise had momentum going into halftime. I mean, change that play. I'm guessing Boise wins. That was among 4 or 5 plays in that game that went against Boise. They lose on a last-second field goal at home to UCF. They lose to Memphis by 3 when the key play being a blocked field goal return for a touchdown, a 10-point play. I mean, you don't have to get too creative to think this 7-5 Boise State team could be 9-3, could be even 10-2ish. And are they only laying 2.5 here against UNLV? I'm not sure that I don't think so. And I think you brought up something, Todd, that I haven't heard anybody bring up all week. Now, it's easier to plan for your Vegas trip when you know the schedule 6 months in advance and you can get that down. But I've seen, being in this town the last almost decade, I've seen Boise State travel here a couple times, and I'm not talking they bring a few fans. I'm talking 10, 15,000 fans, have more fans than UNLV type situations. Now, I don't expect that to be the case here, but if you're expecting some, best home atmosphere in the history of UNLV football, I'm not anticipating it. I wouldn't be a bit surprised the crowd's 60-40 UNLV. It wouldn't shock me if that was the case. So, tough game to power rate as far as, coming up with a number. And, my power rating is only Boise State 1. So why do you like Boise here? Because of the manual adjustments. I think this program is ascending. They've been there, done that. UNLV playing, so many games leveraged back-to-back weeks in a row. It's very similar to me the San Jose State game last week, where statistically Boise's better in yards per play margin, yards per game margin. And I think the thing that the market can't grasp is the strength of schedule disparity, which we had last week. San Jose State played a much tougher schedule. This is the biggest strength of schedule disparity of all 10 conference championship games. I don't think even the models appropriately get that right on a consistent basis. So I'm a Boise here. I know I'm kind of blowing the lead here. I'll let Payne confirm or deny, and I'm not sure I'm going to get confirmation this week like I typically want and want that approval, but I'm on the Boise side of this battle.
Payne, when you look at a game like this, we know that Boise's preferred method to move the football is ground and pound, and we saw Ashton Genty look like the explosive all-purpose back that he's been all season long last week against Air Force, not just as a running back, but also as a receiver. And with Taylon Green's questionable passing accuracy, having that kind of threat out of the backfield pays dividends, paired alongside George Halani. But UNLV no slouch with offensive playmakers in their own right. Jade Mayava named Conference Freshman of the Year earlier this week. You look at what Ricky White has been able to provide in the receiving corps. He leads the Mountain West with 1,300 receiving yards. And you saw a player potentially emerge in his UNLV debut last week opposite White and Corey Thompson, a 6-foot San Diego native, had a couple of catches for 50 yards, and they've talked about him being a bigger focal point in the game plan this week. But when you look at these two teams defensively, obviously flawed in some capacity, where do you see being the key pivot point for one of these teams to find success?
Man. This might be, and who knows, in the moment you do content, it feels like this week might be the best so far that we've had, because there's genuine back and forth. I'm interested to see what the next move is on this game. I have a feeling where it's headed. The shops that opened first under a field goal took Boise money. As soon as we got to the key of 3, UNLV took money. And as we're sitting here recording, the same thing is going on. This game went from 2.5 to 3 at a couple shops, and it got blasted back down, and we're still at 2.5. The more I dig into this game, it's easy to present cases for both sides. Boise fired its coach. Brad hit it perfectly. The players have responded positively, and the vibe was the kids didn't like Andy Avalos. Big shock. Mario Cristobal guy. Boise also got a touch healthier. But the 3-game winning streak against New Mexico, Utah State, 2 of the worst teams in the country, and then a beaten and battered Air Force without multiple key cogs to run its unique option offense doesn't completely do it for me. I know Boise and San Jose State live on the same street in terms of power rating, and we all watched San Jose State lead by 20 in the fourth quarter. But in saying that, you could have taken San Jose State plus 3.5 in that game, which was meaningless to UNLV last week, and now you want to lay 2.5 against UNLV in a game that means the world to them. So theoretically, we've had a 6-point adjustment in just 7 days on the UNLV fade for two teams, again, that like if San Jose State and Boise State played right now, probably is what, Brad? Like pick one?
No, Boise be favored by 3 or so. Keep in mind those two teams.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, Boise was laying 7 at home to San Jose State earlier this season. I would still have that 3-ish.
Okay. I am also interested to see what Barry Odom comes up with here. Right? Like he's a guy that all three of us really respect as a defensive mind. Was the reason Arkansas's defense was respectable for multiple seasons with inferior talent playing in the SEC. We know Boise wants to run the ball. To me, it's not surprising they found success running it against Utah State and New Mexico, two teams outside the top 120 defending the run. UNLV by no means is the 85 Bears up front, but like they're inside the top 40 in EPA per rush allowed, and I think Odom, something we talked about last night, Todd, forces Talon Green to beat him. Green is the full-time starter now. He's only had to attempt 40 passes the last 3 games because Boise was able to just hand it off in 2 games. And despite playing Air Force defense that doesn't see many passes in practice all week, Green threw 2 picks on 17 attempts. And to me, just on paper, the biggest matchup advantage is UNLV's pass game against Boise's secondary, which we've had questions about all season. UNLV, even when you adjust for schedule, is top 30 in both passing success and EPA. Boise State's outside the top 100 defending the pass. For me, like aside from the ridiculous negative variance and flat out horrific bad beats this season, this game is the reason 2023 has been a little wonky because I can confirm Brad's side, right? I've gotten multiple buy orders sent to me for Boise. Very respected bettors and groups are indicating Boise is the side. Every time we get to 3, though,
Invisible Man.
The Invisible Man comes out, and the running joke internally is like the Invisible Man's hitting about 99%. So, like you can see the path, right? You can see the matchups on the field. It's Spencer Danielson as much as the players are rallying around him, and they are, right? I mean, he just interviewed for this job full time on Monday. This could be a win-win for the Gipper. He's like 5 years removed from being a freaking GA going against Barry Odom. So I don't have a dog in the fight, but I will say Brad's side is confirmed as quite true.
You don't have a dog in the fight, but I'll tell you one thing you do have over me. You know my power ratings better than I do. I only have Boise 1 on a neutral on San Jose State, which concerns me. That it does concern me.
Okay. This game is like, ugh. It's so frustrating this season, right? And everyone's able to hear it in our voices right now as we kind of like we are like 12 data points into this. Like we should have something more concrete on games this large, and it's been such a wonky season.
I'll tell you one thing: if it was San Jose State, Boise State, you guys would have had to physically restrain me from not betting San Jose State for a substantial position, talking about everything that they let get away as a result of blowing that 20-point lead on the Smurf turf up there. But alas, not the matchup we have, so it's a moot point on a variety of fronts, and we'll see which one of these teams walks out of Allegiant Stadium Saturday afternoon with a Mountain West Conference championship on their resume. Speaking of battles, and we'll get there in a second, you guys can follow our esteemed panel of experts on social media, easy for me to say. Brad Powers 7. You can follow Payne there at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me on social media, but as always, most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And gentlemen, yet another battle starting to take place in the market as we record here on a Wednesday morning. SMU and Tulane. Tulane will host this game.
It's been a battle, but you're watching it right now live.
Yeah, Tulane will host this game. We saw this number open 3.5, get as high as 6. Respected bettors driving it up before the news of Preston Stone became official. And that's when there was a very different school of thought, as the number has considerably dropped since then. Now trending towards a field goal right back where we opened. And Brad, normally I'd come up with a fancy, loquacious way to introduce this game, but I'm not going to bury the lead here. What do you have as a drop-off from Preston Stone being out for SMU to the backup quarterback in Jennings, who Rhett Lashley announced will be the starter for the conference championship game?
I only have it at 3.5 points. And obviously the market, at least, if you'd asked me this question 24, 36 hours ago, I would have said, hey, I am way off market here. The market thinks Preston Stone is one of the more valuable players in all of college football. At least a touchdown he's worth to the spread. I did not agree with that whatsoever. Why not? Well, I mean, I've watched quite a bit of SMU football. I've liked this team from the start. I watched them against Oklahoma. I even tweeted, I said, hey, this is a good-looking Group of 5 team. This is maybe the best Group of 5 team at that point watching them in that game. But I have never been overwhelmed all season long with Preston Stone. Hasn't even, hit 60% of his passes with all the talent advantages they have on the outside. They got a kid, R.J. Maryland, a tight end stud. We'll better get drafted if somebody knows anything about college football and watching tape. But, he's been good. I would say not great. And they got a kid in Kevin Jennings. I've seen a few times. In fact, I watched him play last year in a few games. And he's got a pretty good look to him. He's certainly more mobile. I don't think the moments have ever been too big for him. I mean, he was high leverage game against Rice this year where that game was not put away when he got in the mix there in the second half and had to lead him to a key scoring drive to put that game away. He played a whole half last year against Tulsa. I watched him lead Mordecai got hurt and Stone wasn't available against Memphis last year. SMU went on like a 16-play, 90-yard touchdown drive in a first half against Memphis a year ago that he led. This is a kid that was a state champion at the high school level in the state of Texas, so he's a winner. He's, doesn't have a lot of attempts, but I mean, in his career, he's got 46 attempts. He's thrown 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. I don't see a touchdown downgrade, even though the market, at least originally, at least 36 hours ago said that it was. But no, I'm 3.5 points. So, where I went on this game, and not to be a downer like Eeyore here from Winnie the Pooh, but I mean, if there was one game and one side that was lining up this week, there was a lot of people itching to bet SMU. Clearly superior team to Tulane. I mean, this SMU team, number 6 in yards per play margin in the country, number 3 in yards per game margin, the points per game margin, number 4. This, to me, was by far the best team at the Group of 5 level, and they were playing a team that's been getting by in Tulane, a distracted coach, a banged-up wide receiver core. And the injury, and I texted Payne right when I saw it, because I was looking forward to this game so much. On one of my 5 TVs with all the big games last week, I was watching SMU Navy because I just wanted to keep an eye on SMU, because I wanted SMU so badly this week to be like play of the week, play of the month type material. And Preston Stone's getting hurt in the second quarter, and I texted Payne. I'm like, ooh, that's not good.
The kicker here is a really well-respected bettor that I speak with that usually is not able to do it because of limit problems. Texted me maybe 10 minutes before that injury that he had some plus 2.5 on SMU that he was grabbing on the look ahead, and then that injury came down. So, Todd, we don't have to spend a ton of time here, but like from a podcasting perspective, this game has lost a lot of luster. And we were all going to have a substantial size bet here on SMU had it been Preston Stone. I think Brad was just smart enough to grab the peak number of 6 there as we look at like 3.5, 4. But just to kind of reiterate this game, I think, listen, Preston Stone might be a little bit larger of a loss than I initially thought, having watched the Memphis game, but Memphis doesn't have much of a defense. So you're going to have to be able to run the ball here if you're SMU. And, Tulane does a really good job stopping the run, right? Like top 25 in EPA per rush allowed. So it's going to be a game in Jennings' hands. Tulane's offense has been clunky. We've talked about that. Brad mentioned the cluster injuries at wide receiver. You can see the differing opinions on Tulane just last week in the UTSA game, like follow the market. That game was like 2.8, got sent to 3.5, and then right before kick, UTSA got buried. So, it's just the total. When you think about backup quarterback cluster injuries for Tulane's offense, it's already clunky. Right? This total opened at a peak of 54.5. Its current floor is 47 within 2.5 days of opening. Depending on how you value Preston Stone, how you value the rumors that this will be really Willie Fritz's last game at Tulane is likely where you were going to land. So, again, we've seen Tulane get laid at 3. We've seen SMU get taken back at +6, and even today the further confirmation is that they're still grabbing 4.5 on SMU, and as we record, it's like
they're grabbing 4
right now. Yeah. So a battle in this game at drastically different numbers. the market's telling you that Preston Stone is not worth as much as the market initially thought, as Brad mentioned. But it just became that twofold process. It's like, hey, we're laying 3 on Tulane because Preston Stone's out. Then all of a sudden the week kind of transitions, and it's like cluster injuries for Tulane, coaches being rumored to leave. We've gotten a little bit more data on Jennings. We understand that Tulane was clunky again last week, but was the beneficiary of being +4 in turnovers. Yeah. And so now all of a sudden, like, hey, we're gonna grab the 6 and let this thing fly. And so that's kind of the synopsis on this game.
You mentioned last week's battle, and to your point, +4 in turnovers. The longest Tulane drive offensively covered 48 yards in that contest. Michael Pratt, 9 of 22, 5 of his 9 completions to the one talented, healthy wide receiver that's left on this roster for Tulane right now in Chris Brazel. And it was pretty much the Mekhi Hughes show, who's taken over the Tajee Spears role, just a bell cow back. And if SMU is going to do things the right way, you hate to say it with a veteran quarterback, make him beat you with a banged-up receiving core. Don't allow them to run the football successfully in this spot, and we'll see if SMU gets a little bit healthier in the backfield in their own right. Both Jalen Knight and LJ Johnson sat versus Navy. Jalen Knight only 2 carries in the win against Memphis. We'll see if those two return to action and provide a little bit more depth in the backfield for the Mustangs, who seek their first conference championship in quite a long time. SEC title game, guys, a lot more at stake this year than, even in previous years, because a loss for either of these teams may keep them on the outside of the college football playoff. Unlike previous installments for the Georgia Bulldogs, I'm not sure they've built up enough of a cushion to say a loss against Alabama won't matter and they can still be into the Final Four. But you want to talk about battles, we've seen plenty here as well. Earlier this morning, you had a chance to take 6.5 with the Alabama Crimson Tide at one of the sharpest offshore books. You had a chance to lay 4.5 at one of the sharpest shops here in town. And we're now looking at 5 on the low end, 6.5 on the high end, 54 on the high end for the total, 53 on the low end. So very little market consensus, to say the least. And this will be these two teams renewing acquaintances. I mean, they'll square off in just the second ever SEC championship game, pitting teams against one another that finished the SEC perfect during the regular season. The other game saw number 2 Alabama rout number 1 Florida back in 2009. When we look at Kirby Smart, he's held the lead in all 5 games against his mentor Nick Saban, but just come out 1-4 against him in those contests. I mean, Georgia, 7th appearance in the title game in the last 8. They've obviously become the gold standard in the SEC East. Meanwhile, Alabama, they make their annual pilgrimage, or so it seems, to Atlanta, making their 15th appearance in the title game. When you look at Bama, though, as terms of trends, they've now gone over in 8 straight SEC title games. The average closing total in those contests has been 50.6. The average points per game scored in those games north of 62. Meanwhile, the Crimson Tide have turned into an over machine so far this season, going over the total in 7 of their last 8 games. And Brad, part of the reason that Alabama has gone over is because they found a little bit of stability at the quarterback position in Jalen Milroe. He may be erratic at times, but he's a big play waiting to happen. And we saw that on full display, much to our chagrin last week, converting 4th and goal from the 31-yard line, a play that I'm convinced had a 0.00001% chance of being successful. We can only hope that Hugh Freeze will never elect to rush 2 players ever again, as long as he is the head coach down there on the Plains. But this is an Alabama offense brimming with confidence against a Georgia defense that has shown some vulnerability against running quarterbacks. The counting stats look good, but this in no way, shape, or form is a dominant addition of Georgia's stop unit like we've seen in recent seasons.
Yeah, I would put the over on the chances of success on a play like that a little bit higher when you got 15 seconds to run around and find an open receiver. I mean, that was stunning to me, stunningly bad that they didn't at least. Milroe's thought process is always run. We've seen him, in the how many times in the last few games have we seen him actually cross the line of scrimmage first, and then he's like, let me throw here. So I can't believe they didn't force him to run there. Terrible. But what isn't terrible is his confidence level. Obviously, it's at an all-time high. And I'll say this, as far as the battle in the market, and Payne will touch on it further, but the battle here on this side of the ball is, whether or not you're using the full season set of data as far as Alabama's offense and Georgia's defense, or you're using current form on these two units, because they would be too conflicting, in my opinion. On one end, the full season stats would say, hey, you're going to give the edge to Georgia's side of the ball here. Current form is going to say Alabama might have the edge here. So, and let's talk about this Alabama offense. Just basic counting stats the last 4 weeks, 46 points per game. Nearly 500 yards per game. They've gotten the ground game going. 240 yards a game on the ground. 6.1 yards per carry. Milrose completing nearly 70% of his passes. That's a far cry from the first 8 games of the season when they're only averaging 30 points per game, less than 400 yards per game total offense, 3.7 yards per carry, which would have been the worst in the Saban era, at least at going all the way back to his first season. And to me, well, what's the change? Well, you can't just say, Milrose getting more confident. I mean, certainly that's the case, but some of it is he's got more protection. I mean, starts up front. This was an Alabama offensive line much maligned for most of the season. 35 sacks allowed the first 8 games, 4 combined the last 4 weeks. So when you get protection up front, you get a quarterback that has time. You saw what he could do on the 4th and 31 type of play. And also, I've seen some emergence, from playmakers. I'm not saying that they're going to rival, the 2018 or 19 Alabama wide receiver core, but Isaiah Bond, he just didn't make the play on the 4th down. He's been making plays last 3-4 weeks. A guy that can count on. Burton, obviously, has been their go-to guy all year, but it's helped him out. It's, maybe teams aren't double teaming him and rolling over the coverages on his behalf. They found a go-to running back in McClellan. That's been the case here the last half of the season. So I love the trend line in this Alabama offense. I'm seeing some weaknesses on Georgia defensively that leaves me a little bit concerned here. Now, I will say this. Missed opportunity last week. The further I rewatched the tape, and then I just thought about it. I don't know why I didn't line up on Georgia Tech last week. Obviously, you had a guy that was on the Georgia staff last year, Buster Faulkner. Then you look at the injury report for Georgia, sitting guys out. And the market said opposite. There was Georgia money on game day. I don't know why I wasn't taking 25.5 with Georgia Tech last week. Georgia Tech's offense had success against the Georgia defense. But I'm not overreacting to one data point. You look at the last few games. There's been a consistency of teams being able to run on Georgia. And that hasn't been the case the last 5 years. I mean, we're talking about the best rushing defense in college football on a consistent basis for last 4 years running. And yet this year, they're allowing about 40 yards per game more than what they did at least the last couple of years. And the recent trend line last month, 166 rushing yards per game allowed by this Georgia defense. When you're thinking about, well, how's Georgia going to match up here? Are they going to put an extra guy in the box to stop the run? Is he finally going to put an extra guy maybe in the box to get after Milroe a little bit here? Or obviously, and Payne was on this really at the start of the year, Milroe being successful, his most successful play is throwing the ball down the field. He's actually remarkably accurate, as accurate and as good as any quarterback in the country. Is Kirby not putting extra guys in the box, and he's worried about getting beat over the top? So very unique. I don't have a great feel for it on how exactly he's going to do it. He hasn't had an overwhelming amount of success defending the Alabama offense. I mean, you look at some of the prior matchups. I mean, if it wasn't for the wide receiver injuries, in the national championship game, I'm not sure even in the game that he won, he would have had great success defending this Alabama offense. So I'm anxious to see how that's being defended early on. As far as, great take, I kind of agree with the market. I thought the early 4 was a little cheap. I thought 6.5 was getting a little expensive on the Georgia side, so I kind of agree with the market movement here.
Hey, it's fair. A game of this magnitude, moving around to some secondary key numbers in the 4 and the 6, you're going to have a wide range of opinions start to impact things. One thing that I want to follow up with you real quick, Brad, before we go to the other side of the ball with Payne. When you look at Alabama's backfield, if Jason McClellan isn't able to go dealing with a lingering foot injury, how much does that change some of the handicap given what you've seen from their backfield depth?
Williams has been fine. He actually got more carries last week when it was a little explosive, and they used him in the most high leverage run of the season. Of a 4th and goal, they pitched out to him. It wasn't McClellan there on that 4th and goal. So that to me says that they got confidence in him. And obviously, Saban loves his true freshman. He hasn't been really unleashed yet, but going back to the spring game, I thought he was the best running back on the field in that game. So I'm not too worried about Alabama's run game. And if it comes down to it, this is the win or go home type of situation. your best running back might be Jalen Milroe running the football. I mean, this is a game you're not afraid to run him 20, 25 times if need be.
Oh, and we saw that. I mean, we've seen that in recent weeks, them being much more aggressive, taking the reins off of Milroe, giving him free range to be able to go out there and do that. The LSU game, probably his Mona Lisa, so to speak, as a runner, and you saw how explosive and dynamic he could be, forcing LSU into quite a bit of conflict in terms of how they were going to go about defending them. Payne, when we look at Georgia offensively, I mean, this is a group that scored on 58% of its drives versus FBS opponents this year. It's the third best rate in the country behind LSU and Oregon. You wouldn't know that given that Georgia doesn't get the same press and publicity for being an offensive juggernaut compared to some of the teams that are operating in that same particular tier. Carson Beck, pretty pedestrian last week against Georgia Tech, and to Brad's point, you could understand it knowing that Georgia erred on the side of caution, kept some of their key contributors on the sidelines in a game where they were more than a 3-touchdown favorite. We look at the backfield, Kendall Milton starting to emerge as their true bell cow back. 2 of his 3 career 100-yard rushing games have come over the last couple of weeks. All signs point to Brock Bowers being a full go, Ladd McConkey being out there amongst others against an Alabama defense that, I think the 3 of us have talked about, that there's a lot of bark and not necessarily the same level of bite that we've seen in the past. Carson Beck, his youth and inexperience in a game of this magnitude with the Georgia offense matched up against the Alabama defense. How do you see things playing out here?
Man, again, just listening to you and Brad talk, there's more unknowns for a Bama-Georgia matchup with Saban and Kirby than I think any of the prior meetings. Georgia's offense still hasn't played a fully competent defense yet. I mean, we're talking about the Dogs facing a schedule of defense is barely inside our top 80. We see the athletes, right? We've seen the stretches of elite efficiency. You mentioned the touchdown drives percentage there against Power 5 opponents. You can only play who's on the schedule. At the same time, I don't think Alabama's defense has been fully tested the more I go back and assess the prior data points. And the best offense it faced with the Longhorns, which is, fringe top 10 unit, Texas had its way offensively. 50% success rate, 10 explosive plays, hung 34 in Tuscaloosa. Ole Miss, you never know what you're going to get out of them. It's a little funky, especially up front in terms of blocking, but that was also a banged-up Ole Miss receiver group. A&M was without its 5-star quarterback. The Vols offense is way down this year and shredded Bama's defense the first 30 minutes. LSU was cooking Bama's defense until Jaden Daniels got injured. So,
thanks for that reminder.
I think there's some... Yeah, I think there's some variance on this side of the ball. I mean, even last week during the Iron Bowl preview, I mentioned Alabama's run defense had me a little skeptical in that, they're outside the top 100 in defensive line yards allowed, but somehow top 15 in rushing success rate allowed. And yes, that can indicate linebackers and safeties are doing a fantastic job rallying to the ball, and we saw that a few times where the freshman Caleb Downs looks like he's shot out of a cannon and becomes like this heat-seeking missile. But the delta is far too large for there not to be regression for Alabama's run defense. And sure enough, Alabama gave up over nearly 3.2 yards per rush before first contact to Auburn. So on paper, I see a Bama defense that doesn't dominate the line of scrimmage or create lots of havoc or tackles for loss. And so I think Georgia likely continues their early down success, which is top 15 in the country, that Carson Beck's going to be in some manageable situations. Bama also has a tendency to give up the explosive pass as well, outside the top 40 in big pass prevention. Had another coverage bust on the Javarius Johnson touchdown last week. There's some young guys back there. So I think Georgia's going to find offensive success. I think we'll see a healthier version, to your point, of the Dogs offense. Tate Ratledge, the big fella at guard, expected to play this week, was dealing with a little bit of a knee bruise, dressed for the Georgia Tech game, but didn't play. Bowers' ankle a little bit more sore than usual. Now he's got the rest. I would expect him to go. Ladd McConkey looks like he's trending right. The only guy that is, I wouldn't say you definitely need, but certainly been a contributor is Ra Thomas, the foot sprain. I think he might be a little bit dicier. I come back to this and I'm a little surprised at some of the movement on the total here, just listening to Brad talk about Georgia's defense, declining and Alabama's offense stepping up a little bit. And I think it was perfectly stated in that if you just look and listen to some of the things Jalen Milroe has said earlier this year, he kind of came out I don't really like running the ball. And we're all thinking to ourselves, my guy, you're 6'3", 230 and run 4.4. Like, that's probably your best attribute along with the deep ball. And that combination at the college level makes it extremely difficult to defend. But you go down the list and you see all the high leverage games. Texas, high leverage game, 15 carries. Ole Miss, thought to be at the time high leverage, 16 carries. LSU, 20 carries. That was off the bye, and it just looked like he was completely healthy for the first time, right? There were some rumors about Milroe having a little bit of a nagging lower body injury, came out of the bye, refreshed, and then 18 runs again last week against Auburn in a high-leverage game that was a little bit closer than we all expected. So I would envision a full dose of his legs. Kirby Smart had a presser this week where he came out and said, hey, we've done okay stopping the run, but we are really struggling against mobile quarterbacks. Yeah. We saw that again last week against Georgia Tech. And then again on this side of the ball, I think, Todd, you and I talked off air a little bit. Like, Georgia's offense has been efficient. They haven't been pushed a ton this year. So, again, just a lot of battles going on in the market here where, the numbers guys laid 4 on Georgia early. We're now at 6.5 at Chris. That's always interesting, is like, the sharp guys out west are saying one thing, the sharp guys offshore are saying, potentially another thing. Seeing that dichotomy between some of the sharper shops in Vegas, taking money at 4.
Has that happened more often this year than years
Chris
past?
To 6.5. Yeah, because there's new entrants to this game, individual bettors, new groups. We're in a new time right now with a lot of different money entering the market, and they're all betting at different places. So it's been a little bit more prevalent this season.
A little bit.
But I think, right, like at 6.5 come game day, you're probably going to see a buy on Alabama. God forbid if it gets to 7, like, you're going to see a buy on Alabama.
Yeah.
It wouldn't completely stun me either unless there was some massive piece of news that maybe 53 is the floor here on the total.
It's been interesting to watch this unfold, to say the least. And you mentioned Georgia not being pushed. Some of the offensive numbers that they've been able to register in the first half, other than the Missouri game, consistently getting to that 3-touchdown threshold and then easing off the accelerator a bit. We've seen some of the trends for Alabama on one of the fastest tracks in college football when they play in this particular building. Be interesting. I know the pace numbers don't suggest this being a track meet, but these two teams efficient and definite paths to being able to move the football against their defensive counterparts. A game in Charlotte, though, that may not be as high scoring, gentlemen, will pit Louisville against Florida State for the ACC title. Louisville comes in off of that upset loss last week against Kentucky, a game they were on the wrong end of a 38-31 decision as a 7.5-point favorite in that contest. Meanwhile, Florida State remained perfect from a straight-up standpoint with a cover coming late against the Florida Gators in Gainesville. First appearance in the ACC championship game for Florida State since 2014. That was the last of 3 straight titles. They've performed well in this game in the past. Mike Norvell looking to even up his record in conference championship games at 2-2, 1-2 in conference title games while at Memphis. Meanwhile, for Louisville, Jeff Brom becomes the first coach in FBS history to take 2 different teams to conference title games in back-to-back seasons. Did so last year with Purdue in the Big Ten Championship. Ville's schedule set up favorably, and they took full advantage of that. But you do wonder about Louisville's mental state in this particular spot. We have seen some money come in on the Cardinals coming off of that key number of 3. And Brad, when you looked at this opener, knowing that the market was going to struggle with the potential adjustment from Jordan Travis to Tate Rodemaker, did you feel it was fair or foul that some books opened this game as high as 6? We saw the majority of shops come out at 3.5, and even that, there was a strong dog buy pushing it down to 2.5 where we currently sit.
Yeah, foul. Really foul, to be honest with you. A little bit surprised because, my initial downgrade from Jordan Travis to Rodemaker was 6 points. Last week, my power rating said lean to Florida State. I didn't get to the window because I just wanted to see what it looked like. But the fact that, flash forward a week and now all of a sudden my numbers were really strong opposing Florida State when just 1 week prior it was saying back them. It said that there's something really mispriced here. What did I do with Florida State? Again, the story of the season, not a very black and white data point against Florida. On one hand, I got to look at an offense, just basic stats. 224 yards, can't top 100 rushing yards when, that's something you probably wanted to do to have success against Florida's defense, to take it out of the hands of Rodemaker. You're down 12-0 early. And, I mean, this is against a Florida defense that allowed the previous 5 weeks 41 points per game and more than 500 yards per game. And, I mean, 24 points and a lot of it late and 224 yards doesn't breed a lot of confidence. But with that said, you're on the road. You got a backup quarterback. You're down 12-0. Most high leverage situation of the entire season. Regardless of who's under center, you got to be impressed that Florida State was able to get the job done. This week, I mean, it'll be a little bit different story. I guess my biggest takeaway wasn't even Florida State last week. It was the immaturity of Florida, who to me just looked like a total mess once that game was getting away from them. So that was my biggest takeaway from that performance. I'm certainly a lot more confident. I'm anxious to hear what Payne has to say. Rodemaker looks a lot better than what he did in previous year's editions. And you've heard Payne say that. And so far, it's so good this season. Keep in mind, he also entered a game that they were trailing 13-0 the week prior. And they almost covered a 50-point spread. So he's been fine. I worry here. And I think the key is going to be offensive line has to protect him. Louisville's got one of the better pass rush kids in the entire country in that Gelati, and they got to be able to run the ball a little bit better, which I question because if there's one strength on Louisville's defense, it's the ability to stop the run. So, but all that being said, 2.5, I'm surprised it punched so easily through 3 with not much resistance at all so far.
Brad, you mentioned Tate Rodemaker, and he looked the part for stretches last week. Came in, built a little bit of confidence against North Alabama, but the team he'll see this week, he should have plenty of confidence in facing, knowing he was 6 of 9 for 109 yards, 2 touchdowns when he filled in for Jordan Travis in an injury game on the road last year. Johnny Wilson absolutely terrorized the secondary of Louisville in that previous game. Having Keon Coleman opposite him will be difficult for Louisville to contend with. They're able to get that vertical passing game going. But Payne, Louisville defensively has really taken on water over the last couple weeks, allowing an average of more than 280 passing yards and 120 rushing yards over the last 3 games. Brom didn't mince words, came out and said, referring to the recent showings as a coaching matter, saying that his staff plans to add some creativity to ensure players are in the best position to succeed, allowing 24-plus points in each of their last 3 games. When you look at a key factor here, is it Florida State's offense being able to push Louisville's defense with a semi-inexperienced quarterback, or is it all about the stop unit getting things going against the Louisville offense that, quite frankly, hasn't shown as well from an explosive play standpoint as Jawar Jordan continues to deal with a hamstring injury. Isaac Guerrero has filled in admirably, but the passing game has really lost a little bit of punch, with Jamari Thrash only having 10 catches for 89 yards over the last 3 games, still dealing with the aftermath of that hand surgery.
I am going to go just completely off the cuff, and it's probably word salad, and feel free to interject or ask questions. I look at this game. It's one of the few times Mike Norvell's gone into a game this season and didn't have a massive advantage in coaching, in scheme, and adjustments. We really respect the hell out of Jeff Brom. I mean, just continually did less at Purdue.
Did more with less.
Right? Yeah. And it's just like, to me, the start of this game's vital. And that's what I'm interested in seeing, how FSU handles that. Like, if you're not close enough to the program, it's harder to identify. But defensively, for instance, Adam Fuller's come out with somewhat vanilla game plans. And his goal is to unleash the real plan after half, where an offense spends 18 minutes making an adjustment during the break on something they won't actually see in the second half. And so if you look at FSU's defensive numbers in the second half this season, they're as good as it gets. And that's been the trend line all season. Even that high-powered LSU attack, 0 points the first 28 minutes of the second half. Only touchdown was on a busted coverage with all 4 freshmen in the secondary trailing 45-17. We have seen this constantly, where Adam Fuller kind of plays a little possum early. I don't know if you can do that early and get behind here, because Max Brown isn't under center. I would expect lots of eye candy on offense from Brom, right? He's going to pop on the Gators film. He's going to see that gives FSU's linebackers and safeties some problems with eye discipline. Florida State's got to stop the ground game, right? If you look at defensive line yards and havoc and tackles for loss, all great for FSU. And I think it could show better. What was one thing I talked about a few weeks ago, right? There's not a lot of horses, but they're resting them.
Yep.
And so suddenly you saw in the Florida game, Jared Verse plays the most snaps of the season. Fisk, Lovett, Payton, all playing substantially more snaps. And they went with that big front where you're kicking out Fisk to outside to the edge. And they really didn't allow Florida to do much, aside from that explosive before the half where Norvell got a little greedy trying to go for a punt block, and it led to an explosive run. I think when you look at Florida State, they got to be a little bit more gap sound because, again, they're very good defensive line yards, havoc, tackles for loss, but they're outside the top 70 in EPA per rush allowed. So they got to be a little bit more gap sound. They got to tackle better, whether it's Jordan or Garendo, to your point, Todd. You got to stop that run. You got to force Jack Plummer to live in a position of being uncomfortable, and that's you don't want him throwing with play action on like second and medium because that's a favorable situation to Jack Plummer. You want Plummer throwing from second and long, third and medium plus, where you can get after him and get him off his spot. And if FSU does that enough times, right, you're going to see the version of Jack Plummer that's making the head-scratching decision where he throws a pick or runs himself into a sack on a crucial down. And that's why Louisville's outside the top 100 in passing down sack rate allowed. But you actually got to get him in that position. So if Louisville's running and you're not getting him in that position, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. The other side of the ball has a wide range of variance, right? You can look at Louisville's defense, and they've been very good down to down, top 20 in the country in success rate allowed. They're outside the top 100 in explosive play defense. Florida State's offense is the inverse. Above average down-to-down efficiency, one of the 10 most explosive teams in the country. So you might have a situation where 8 out of every 10 plays, Louisville's winning defensively, but FSU's hitting a couple chunk plays. And one of the comments Trey Benson said last week that Mike Norvell told him was like, hey, you're going to go for 2, you're going to go for 2, you're going to go for 2, and then you're going to pop a 30. And that's exactly what we saw last week, right? He just, down to down, it ain't there. But he pops 3 big ones. It's also really tough to gauge Louisville's defense because, Todd, you hit this perfectly. Look fantastic in spots. Then the last 3 weeks, like a 5'10", 170-pound 3-star freshman and Anthony Calandria goes ham against him. Devin Leary looks capable. One of the few times
he looked
this
good.
season.
Devin looked good. It was apparently the Louisville defense got him going there in the Bluegrass Showdown.
I think about that the week before. Tyler Van Dyke, who was benched and is playing on one leg, throws for nearly 350. Now, Louisville fans are like, hey, Jarvis Brownlee has been injured and hasn't been playing much. And he is their top corner. And I can tell you Jarvis Brownlee is certainly looking forward to this matchup as a former Florida State guy who got roasted by Johnny Wilson last season. Played a couple more snaps last week. Is he going to be 100%? That would be massive for Louisville secondary in this spot. Got to follow that. I think the big question is Tate Rodemaker. I caught a lot of shit last year because in this very game I tweeted out, I told the world, he's a 10-point downgrade over Jordan Travis. I caught a lot of flack for that. As we fast forward and one guy is, fourth in the Heisman list and the other guy's turned in the wrong way to hand off a ball after 4 years in the system, I think people started getting a little bit closer to where I thought it was. From what I hear internally, Tate has drastically improved the last 12 to 14 months. And bettors are now kind of pushing closer towards my initial downgrade. It sounds like everyone's kind of coming up with this consensus of like 7 points. And I'm kind of coming down off the 10. So we're meeting somewhere in a normal range. I look at last week, and Brad did point out the counting stats, and I'm not trying to bust his balls, but I think Florida State possessed the ball for 8 minutes in the second half. Part of that is going 3 and out for sure. But Florida, went on like an 8-minute drive and then missed a field goal, and then Florida State went 3 and out, and then Florida went on another 8-minute drive and scored a touchdown off the phony roughing the passer. So he didn't really have the ball. And I go back and watch, and you think to yourself, Tate Rodemaker couldn't have been put in a worse situation. First start in the swamp at night, rivalry game, bowl eligibility on the line, down 12-0. Average starting field position in the first half for Florida State was their own 18. So Norvell had to be somewhat conservative with his approach because of the horrific starting field position. I think the offense continues to be designed a little bit more for Tate because he doesn't have the improvisation of Jordan Travis, obviously. But FSU's going to need more from Tate because you're not facing a backup quarterback. You're facing Jeff Brom, who can match wits with the best of them, right? Offensively, Brom is going to do some things to put the Florida State linebackers in conflict and coverage. Louisville's offensive line is also both better and healthier than the Gators, which, FSU obviously dominated last week. I'll say the same thing I said last week. The nation's perspective of FSU, while it's beaten and battered and missing the most valuable player at the most valuable position, is irrelevant to their goals internally. Like college football playoff, national championship, like those were never this team's goals, right? This isn't the 93 team, the 2013 or the 2014 team. Like the goal was to win 10 plus regular season games, win the state championship, beating Miami and Florida, make the ACC championship game. And the final goal is win the ACC championship by one. What comes after that is mostly irrelevant to them. And they had kind of been preparing for this, right? Resting all of these guys in some of these games. And so I think some of the other parts around Jordan Travis might be a little bit better than perception because they were all kind of sitting out and resting. This is just a tough game. Now throw in some weather, right? It looks like it's going to be a torrential downpour all morning, all afternoon. It does lighten around the time kickoff gets there right now. And then around 10 o'clock, it's supposed to be completely gone. You're going to have to monitor that. But aside from, Tate Rodemaker and Florida State's defense playing, its starters a little bit more in these high leverage games than they'd shown earlier in the year, the weather there is also impacting this total. So, I mean, there's a lot of variance here. It'll be interesting to see if someone wakes up at some point and be like, man, 2.5 is a little low.
Yeah. I'm waiting.
But to your point, we just haven't we just have not seen any resistance. And in my mind, even though the field is a neutral state, and that'll be a little bit easier on Tate Rodemaker, I think Louisville's right now better than the version of last week's Florida, and it's going to be a war, right? It's going to be a very difficult game for Florida.
Can I boost your confidence? A couple areas to give you some confidence.
Yeah.
You know me, I watch a lot of games. If there was one unit that popped to me last week across the entire country, I'm not saying it's the best unit, but just something that looked entirely different than I was accustomed to watching all year, Florida State's defensive line. I thought, whoa, there was more than a few moments I'm like, I have not seen this all year, especially your boy Fisk in a different position really popped to me. And something that I haven't heard anybody.
Multiple NFL guys.
Yeah, and something I haven't heard anybody talk about. You talked about, I don't know what this Louisville defense the last couple weeks. Hey, maybe they're a little depth shy. And they played some high leverage games here, especially, last 3 weeks down to the wire, needing a stop or inability to make a stop. The Virginia game, this all-out 60 minutes at the goal line against Miami, and then last week's game. So there might be some opportunity. I'm not sure that Louisville's hitting on all throttles here as far as a rest aspect.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, Florida State was, again, resting all of these guys because they just don't have a ton of horses. But when you start to line up Patrick Payton and Fabian Luffett and Joshua Farmer and Braden Fisk and obviously Jared Verse, like those guys are all going to be in the league. They're all going to make a paycheck in the NFL. And why this was a little annoying, I think, and why the Jordan Travis injury hit home a little bit more is like they were preparing for all of these things down the line that people didn't think they were good enough to do, because the other guy is a guy named Daryl Jackson, who was hotly contested in the transfer market, and he didn't get his waiver. Once the semester ends, he's going to be available for postseason play. This isn't one of them, unfortunately, but he would be there for the college football playoff. And so suddenly you had a healthy Jordan Travis, and you had about 7 guys who would be in the NFL from this defensive line in some form or fashion. I know I'll go in the first round. But you talk to people internally at Florida State before the season, and you're like, who's your most talented guy? Like, who's got the highest upside? And like, Daryl Jackson. Like, you mean after verse? Like, no, Daryl Jackson. And so if you were able to add him to the mix to then go face a Michigan who wants to pummel you a little bit up front, you would have had a little bit more of a better time than I think the market and the perception of this team yields to some even bettors and fans out there. So it's unfortunate and disappointing. So again, like this, their goal is to win this game, and like everything else is pretty much irrelevant.
Well, there's plenty of people apparently in the college football world rooting against Florida State, claiming that they, even at 13-0, aren't deserving a Power 5 conference champion that could run the table of getting in because they won't have their starting quarterback. So we'll see if they can use that chip and let him spearhead what has been an impressive season down there in Tallahassee as they continue to build that program back to some of the blue blood levels we've grown accustomed to in the past. Last but not least, a game, at least on paper, that seems to be the least competitive of the day amongst all of our conference championships will pit the Michigan Wolverines against the Iowa Hawkeyes in the Big Ten Championship game in Indianapolis. Michigan, a 23.5-point favorite, total on the game 35. We saw this matchup just 2 short years ago, and the Hawkeyes didn't stand much of a chance, losing to Michigan 42-3. Hawkeyes would be the biggest dog ever to win a conference championship game if they did it as more than a 20.5-point dog. That's the number that Texas was catching from Nebraska in the first ever Big 12 championship game back in 1996, and marks the only time a conference championship game had a dog win outright when they were catching more than 18 points. 3 teams have won championship games as 3-possession underdogs. Miami of Ohio did it over NIU as a 17.5-point dog in 2010. Texas A&M knocked off Kansas State as a 17.5-point pup as well back in the late 90s. Michigan has been a freight train against Big Ten opponents. We'll see if they can keep this going. As we look at the current total in the game, it'll be the lowest we've ever seen in a conference championship game, besting the 39 that we saw in the ACC title game back in 2008. So it speaks to Iowa. Kudos to you, Hawkeyes fans. Kirk Ferentz is an absolute wizard, and you should build a statue of Phil Parker in front of Kinnick Stadium when given the opportunity. Brad, when we look at this number, I know it's a low total, so it makes laying a number of this magnitude that much more difficult, and every point isn't created equally. But good Lord, this Iowa offense is reinventing ways to win football games by doing less and less on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I've seen some statistics out there. They can't find a team that's ever with this type of offense to forget 10 games, and they've never been able to win 9 games in a single season before. That's the base accounting stats. The worst offense in the country as far as this Iowa offense. Whenever I see something like this, though, my mind starts pondering: have we ever seen a 23.5-point favorite with a total of 35.5? And generally speaking, how do favorites do? And you asked the question, it was kind of already on my mind. Big favorites, low totals. And it's not good for the favorite. So cleared it up. A total of 40 or less, favorite of 10 or more. So real simple. Low total, 40, double-digit favorite. I got a decent sample size here. We're talking nearly 140 games. 43% against the spread for the favorite in those types of situations, failing to cover by 3 points per game. Let's tighten up the parameters. 14 so a 2-touchdown or more favorite, total of 37 or less, 30% against the spread, the favorite. Now only 23, a sample size of 23, but falling short of expectation, that being the spread by 8 points per game. And then since, we got an historic line, an historic total here, it's keeping the parameter at 37 or less as far as the total, and a 3-touchdown or more favorite. It's only happened 14 times since 1980. 14% against the spread, 2-12 for the favorite of 21 or more with a total of 37 or less, falling short of 11 points per game. Now, with those numbers, that's saying, hey, let's go ahead, let's pony it up, sell the house, the wife, the kids, the car, let's bet some Iowa Hawkeyes, baby. I haven't got there yet, and but doesn't mean I won't get there. I'm just waiting because I'm anticipating, let's just say there's a book out there forecasting that this line ain't done moving yet. I think if you want to bet Iowa, you're going to get a better number. So I'm waiting for better numbers on Iowa, and I'll bet Iowa then.
It is Iowa, and Todd's still in the honeymoon phase of his marriage, so I don't think he's going to sell her to bet Iowa after those trends.
Oh, not after what Iowa did to us last week. If they would have lost 13-10 like they should have against Nebraska, should Chubba Purdy throw the ball to players wearing the right color jerseys, I would have held Iowa in a much higher regard than I currently do. But when you look at Iowa offensively, and I say this because I know we have some pretty devout Iowa fans that tune into this podcast on a weekly basis, they are 133rd of 133 teams in the FBS in total offense, 246 yards per game. Their 10 wins are 2.5 times as many as any team which finished last in the FBS in total offense. In 2008, UCF had the previous high for finishing dead last. They finished the year with 4 wins. And when you look at Iowa, it's not just being close to the next competition at 132. They're 24 yards fewer per game than Kent State, who checks in at 132nd. Now, the Iowa defense, of course, deserve some praise because they've been able to carry the lunch pail. But the one ranked opponent that the Hawkeyes have played this year, they went to Happy Valley, were smacked 31-0. Payne, it's not coincidence that you look at Iowa's team total and the over-under in the first half is a half. The over-under in the second half is a half. What is a key matchup that prevents Michigan from winning this game by margin or allows Iowa to stay in a game where I'm not sure either of us, or the three of us, I should say, are optimistic the Hawkeyes can muster more than a field goal?
Well, I think for all football fans, thank God divisions are going away so we don't have to talk about shit championship games like this. I mean, the Big Ten West is an absolute joke this season. And maybe that's why we're seeing money on Michigan in this spot. I mean, you look at the West Division, it's Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Purdue, and Nebraska all played well below odds maker expectation. Northwestern was the only other team in the West than Iowa that exceeded expectation, winning 7 games. But then I go and look, and Northwestern was the 4th luckiest team in college football, played more like a 4.5 win team. So that West Division was utter shit. And by our numbers, on average, Iowa faced what would be the equivalent of the 70th best team in the country each week. And so Iowa's schedule was an absolute cakewalk because of that. It allowed them to win ugly without playing competent football. It allowed the horseshoe to remain squarely jammed. And so, I mean, just last week, Iowa gets spotted a double-digit lead in a game with a total of 24.5. They enter the fourth quarter with a 30% win expectancy. There were 5 fumbles total in the Iowa-Nebraska game last week. Iowa fumbles twice, recovers both. First 2 Nebraska fumbles get recovered by Iowa. The third Nebraska fumble happens on air as Purdy is running for a first down. He squeezes the ball too tight. There isn't a defender within 10 yards of him. He can frickin' hopscotch his way to the first down, and it's going to set up 1st and 10 inside the green zone, but he fumbles it. All the college football games played last week, Iowa's win was the 6th unlikeliest. Now, Brad's trends were great because you can start to mentally see the formula if you're backing Iowa, which is now out to 24. Right? You're saying to yourself, ton of points, low total, all the pressure on Michigan. Michigan just won its Super Bowl last week against Ohio State. Probably can't crank the dial back up to 100 again this week, even if it is a championship. Michigan's still banged up, right? J.J. McCarthy not 100%. Left tackle Ladarius Henderson not close to 100%. Battled against Ohio State, was a shell of himself if you look at the player grade. Lost Zach Zinter to a horrible leg injury. Miles Hinton not 100%. The only weapon that can create separation in the throw game is Roman Wilson. He's not 100%. Defensively, a couple starters dinged for Michigan. And the 2 things Iowa does well on paper, stop the run and limit points when opposing teams reach their green zone. Hawkeyes are top 10 in both EPA per rush allowed and points allowed per trip inside their 40. So if Iowa can stop the run and punt, turn Michigan into an EPL club in the green zone, in a game where Michigan doesn't need margin, right? Just win and you're into the college football playoff. That's the path for a cover. Where the formula potentially goes awry is if Deacon Hill happens, right? I mean, he's 300 pounds, so he's what you would imagine. Not very nimble.
May you rest in peace, Jared Lorenzen.
Yes. I mean, at least Lorenzen was like cat quick, had like good feet. This guy can barely get out from under center. I think his center stepped on him 3 times, fell to the ground. We almost had a safety and won that thing 12-10. He's not accurate with the football. I mean, Deacon's got 14 turnover-worthy plays to 5 touchdowns. Out of 128 qualifying quarterbacks, Deacon Hill's 127th in QBR. He's also dead last among Power 5 quarterbacks in EPA per play. The soiled formula looks something similar to Minnesota-Ohio State 2 weeks back, where Minnesota's grinding out the game, punting, holding Ohio State to some field goals, and then an explosive and back-to-back turnovers, and the game's over within 5 minutes. That's the way that formula gets soiled here. It's not for me, but I kind of just wanted to lay a few things out. Brad, it sounds like, if this gets to 24 or 24 and a half.
Need that critical half point.
Yeah, 24 and a half, you just kind of plug your nose and do something better with your Saturday evening, like watching Tate Rodemaker in the rain, or just go see a movie. That's probably the best bet rather than watching those two games.
Oh, what a joyous state of affairs we'll have Saturday night under the bright lights in Indy. I actually gave a member of the Fox team a ton of credit. I go, hey, look, however you guys have to go about hyping up this game, knock yourselves out. He goes, I don't want to talk about it. As we'll get Iowa, Michigan for Big Ten supremacy, and that would be the ultimate wrench to throw in the college football playoff if Iowa was able to do the unthinkable and somehow win this game outright. But gentlemen, the fun's not over around these parts. There are a couple championship games we haven't gotten to, and Brad, the floor is yours to highlight a particular matchup that has caught your eye this weekend.
Well, I mean, reason being for loyal listeners of the show, I mean, we got a Liberty-New Mexico State matchup that was featured all the way back in week 3, back in September, where we went ahead and took New Mexico State plus a 10.5, which ironically is right where we're sitting today, 10.5, New Mexico State on the road. Market agreed. It closed 9. New Mexico State's leads outright early. They end up losing. We don't cover. It's actually one of the few that we don't win this year as far as the non-Power 5. But what's interesting is, and this happens a lot, and it's happened more frequently than not this year, I just find that was the last game New Mexico State failed to cover the point spread this year. They have covered 10 games in a row. And even last week when the market lines up against them, Jerry Kill does his magic. To say the least. Do I have something, significant as far as value here? No, like most of these games, it's kind of a peculiar handicap. We're seeing, obviously, different opinions in the market. Some early Liberty money, followed by some New Mexico State money here. I think some of it has to do with the health of Diago Pavia. I think he'll play. Is he going to be close to 100%? We'll see there, but... I just found it peculiar that everyone's talking this Jerry Kill train. I mean, I was on it in week 3, didn't win. He wins 10 straight after that as far as against the spread.
Credit to New Mexico State doubling their win total this season. And if you'd have told me there was a team in this country, Brad, that could win a conference championship after losing to UMass, I probably would have laughed at you. But here we are with the Aggies and what they've been able to do, bouncing back from that season-opening defeat against the Minutemen, a chance to rectify the wrong. The only thing I'm disappointed in that when we introduced this game, you didn't go full Patrick Henry on me and go give me liberty or give me death at the top of your lungs to talk about the Flames and what Jamie Chadwell has done in his first season in Lynchburg, a man who is destined for a bigger job. Probably not this coaching cycle, but in the not-so-distant future. You can follow Brad on Twitter, at BradPower7. You can follow Payne there as well. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Follow me on social media. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at BetTheBoardPod. All right, my friend, we've come to the end of the road. It's the culmination. Well, I guess technically the regular season ended last week over Thanksgiving weekend, more so than college football. But we'll call this the end of the road in terms of regular occurrences of our Wednesday college football podcast. Best bet time, my good man. Where are we going?
I don't know if you're that cultured. I thought you were about to sing us some Boys to Men there at the end.
ABC, BBD, oh yeah.
The end of the road. I mean, we started this campaign with Florida State over LSU. I think people think we're going to bookend it.
Would we get in trouble with, if we went into a full rendition of It's the End of the Road? I actually used to listen to Boys to Men back when that was their top hit.
We're not going back to Florida State here. But that would be fun to bookend. We talked about this game a little bit earlier. Brad was on for that portion, and I think our vibes were very much pretty telling there. Let's go to the SEC championship game. Let's go over 53. Alabama, Georgia, fast track. Again, it's time-stamped above. I think the three of us did probably a 15-minute breakdown on that game. I believe Georgia's offense is going to get pushed a little bit here. I don't really know who Alabama's played offensively. The offenses that they have played have carved them up pretty good. Georgia's defense downtrending a little bit. Jalen Milroe came out of the bye healthy and is a willing runner now. So over 53, Georgia, Alabama.
Fast track, history repeating itself. Alabama overs in conference championship games when they play in Atlanta. Let's get points early, let's get points often, and have Carson Beck and Jalen Milroe go out there and play to the best of their abilities. All right, my good man, it has been a long, arduous road throughout the course of the college football season. Maybe we'll have a wrinkle in store over the next week or two. as we hit on some of those second-tier bowl games. We'll figure that out internally, but the big bowl games, as always, will have their own podcast post-Christmas or thereabouts, and that's why our listeners need to make sure they're following the podcast on Twitter, @BetTheBoardPod, for all those announcements. We have a full slate, or I guess an abridged slate, of NFL games on the docket for tomorrow. Anything else you'd like to share? Can you describe your viewing setup for the kickoff that we'll see in Charlotte, 8 o'clock Eastern on Saturday night, or do you like to keep those details privy?
I need a nap is what I need, because I'm exhausted. We did another marathon podcast for College Football Championship Week. In terms of Saturday, I'll be watching probably with the old man, maybe a little high noon in hand, but somewhere where it's a safe space where I can get a little nutty. If there's another bad call on Akeem Dent for a phantom roughing the passer call, who knows? Who knows?
All right. Well, for all of us that like to put ourselves in the Payne Insider camp, we'll be rooting for Florida State, even without a vested interest there, to protect sound mind and body and make sure you have your mentals in the right spot with FSU, chance to close out the season at 13-0. Want to thank all of our loyal listeners for tuning in each and every week throughout the course of the college football season. There's still plenty of work to be done, but we do all of this for you, the listeners. We love interacting. We love the feedback, and continue to interact with all of us on Twitter. And we wish you nothing but the best, albeit in a bridge slate with championship games this weekend. Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. If nothing jumps out to you, don't feel compelled to bet every game on the board. For Payne Insider, Brad Powers, I'm Todd Fuhrman with an Alabama-Georgia over ticket in hand. We'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.